They told me the accident was brutal. I don't remember much, just the blinding headlights, the shattering crunch of metal, and then nothing. I woke up in a small, sterile hospital room, bandaged, sore, and immobile. My head pounded, and everything seemed distant, like I was watching my life through a fogged window. The doctors said it would take time for my memory to come back, but that was the least of my concerns. I didn't realize how long I'd been there until the nurse came in. She was warm, attentive, and patient. Her voice was soft but confident, like she'd done this 1,000 times. She introduced herself as Emily and ran through a series of questions, taking notes while checking my vitals with the practiced ease of someone who'd been in healthcare for years. As the days blurred together, Emily became my main lifeline to the outside world. My family lived in another state and couldn't visit often, so she was my sole companion, making the endless hours of isolation more bearable. She would bring me books from the library, small snacks she'd saved from her lunch, and always a warm smile. Her presence was grounding, like a lifeline thrown to me as I drifted in a sea of discomfort and loneliness. I didn't think much of it at first, just grateful for the attention. But soon our conversations began to deepen. She told me little things about her life, her love for music, her dream of traveling, her experiences as a nurse. I shared my own stories in return, although they were scattered fragments of a life that now felt almost foreign. We laughed together at silly memories, and for brief moments, I forgot I was confined to a hospital bed. Then, one day, she lingered a little longer than usual. The hum of the machines was the only sound in the room as she adjusted my blanket, her hand resting on mine a moment longer than necessary. She smiled at me, her eyes soft, and I felt my heart race. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at me like that, like I was more than a broken body lying in a sterile bed. After that, everything changed. Emily began visiting even during her breaks, bringing coffee and talking to me about things beyond the routine nurse-patient dynamic. She shared pieces of her past that were both unexpected and haunting. A difficult breakup, her struggles with loneliness, the odd feeling of isolation even when surrounded by people. I felt a strange sense of comfort, knowing that she, too, understood what it was like to feel trapped in some way. As the weeks passed, I started looking forward to her visits more than anything else. My recovery was slow and often painful, but having Emily there made it bearable. I began to realize I was falling for her, though I told myself it was just the vulnerability of the situation, the isolation, and the sheer gratitude I felt toward her kindness. Still, each time she looked at me, I felt a pull, like I'd found something rare and precious. One night, after a particularly difficult physical therapy session, I was lying in bed, struggling to sleep. I was drifting in and out, my mind clouded with pain and exhaustion, when I heard the faint click of my door opening. Through the haze, I saw her standing there, silhouetted in the dim hallway light. "Couldn't sleep?" she whispered, coming to my side. She didn't have her usual warm smile, just a look of deep concern as she gently adjusted my blanket and brushed a stray hair off my forehead. Her touch lingered, soft and comforting, and I felt my heart pounding again. "No," I replied, my voice barely above a murmur. "It's just, everything feels wrong." She nodded, her hand still resting on my shoulder. "I know," she said softly, "but I'm here for you. You're not alone." For a moment we just stayed like that, her hand warm against my shoulder, the quiet hum of the machines the only sound in the room. Then, with a sigh, she stood up and quietly slipped out of the room, leaving me in a mixture of confusion, longing, and something else, a strange, creeping feeling I couldn't quite shake. In the following days, I found myself thinking about that night more than I wanted to admit. Something had changed between us, something that felt as natural as it was unsettling. Our interactions grew more intense, more loaded with an unspoken connection I didn't know how to handle. I wanted to ask her about it, to understand what it all meant, but every time I tried, she would smile softly, her eyes a mix of warmth and something deeper, and change the subject. It wasn't until another week later, during a quiet moment, that she finally acknowledged it. "I've gotten attached to you," she admitted one afternoon, her voice barely a whisper. "More than I should." She glanced around nervously as if worried someone might overhear, and then, looking down at her hands, added, "It's different, you know? With you. I feel like I don't have to pretend." I swallowed hard, feeling my heart race as I watched her fidget with the edge of her scrubs, her fingers trembling slightly. "I feel the same," I managed to say, though my voice came out shaky and uncertain. She looked up, her eyes searching mine, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something almost desperate in her gaze. A need, a longing, and something else that made my skin prickle. "Promise me," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "that no matter what happens, you won't let them take you away. Stay with me." Here, before I could respond, she stood up abruptly, her face a mask of professional composure once again. She forced a smile, patting my hand as if everything was normal. "Get some rest. I'll check on you in the morning," she said, and without another word, she slipped out of the room, leaving me with a million questions and a gnawing sense of unease. The days that followed were a strange mix of connection and tension. Every interaction with Emily seemed to toe a fragile line, like we were both walking a tightrope between comfort and something darker, something that neither of us dared to acknowledge. I began noticing small, unsettling things. My room seemed quieter than the others, with fewer staff around. The windows were always locked, despite the fresh air I'd requested. I assumed it was just protocol, hospital security measures, but each detail added to an underlying sense of confinement that I couldn't shake. And Emily. She grew increasingly possessive, hovering over my care, deciding who could and couldn't enter my room, subtly discouraging me from asking about discharge dates or seeing other visitors. She reminded me, often, that I wasn't ready to leave yet, that I still needed her help. The days blurred together as Emily tightened her hold on my care. Every time I tried to bring up the topic of leaving, she dismissed it with a soft, reassuring smile, reminding me of all the progress I still had to make. Despite her words, I couldn't shake the feeling that my physical condition was steadily improving. I felt stronger, more capable of moving, yet I was never allowed outside my room. My friends stopped coming. My parents' calls grew sporadic, and even when they did come through, Emily would hover close by, occasionally reminding me that talking too long might tire me out. The days became a mix of fleeting memories, with the outside world slipping further from my grasp each time I reached for it. It was as if Emily had become both the key to my recovery and the lock keeping me from it. I began testing the boundaries. One evening, when Emily was away from her post, I ventured to the hallway. The air was stale, and the dim lights made everything feel like a forgotten wing of the hospital. I hobbled down the hall, taking in the emptiness around me. Just a few steps from my door, I stumbled upon a storage closet. I glanced back at the nurse's station, where no one seemed to notice, and slipped inside. The closet was a tight, cramped space filled with medical supplies, but there was a faint light filtering through a small, barred window near the ceiling. I strained to see the world outside, a patch of cloudy sky barely visible. That single glimpse filled me with a mix of hope and despair, a reminder of the world just out of reach. For some reason, the sight only deepened my resolve to get out of there. I was about to leave when I heard footsteps approaching. Panic shot through me as I scrambled out of the closet, trying to act casual, but I knew it was too late. Emily was standing at the end of the hall, her expression unreadable as she stared at me. She walked over, her steps slow and deliberate, her face masked in a mixture of disappointment and something colder. "Where were you going?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with tension. I needed to stretch my legs," I mumbled, feeling an odd shame under her gaze. She didn't respond at first. Instead, she placed her hand on my shoulder, gripping a little too tightly. "You need to understand, wandering around isn't safe for you. There are so many risks, things that could go wrong if you're not careful." Her words had an edge, like a warning wrapped in concern. She led me back to my room without another word, her fingers digging into my shoulder just enough to leave marks. After that, she started locking my door. I told myself it was temporary, that she was just worried about me. But as the days went by, the confinement grew suffocating. Emily's once gentle presence now seemed oppressive, her care a cage that I couldn't escape. She'd still visit every morning, her voice still soft and soothing, but there was a new intensity in her gaze, an unspoken expectation that I'd accept her control without question. One night, unable to sleep, I lay staring at the ceiling, counting the ticks of the clock. I'd been trapped in this cycle for weeks now, with each day blurring into the next, my memories of the outside world fading. Just as I was drifting off, I heard the familiar click of my door. Emily slipped in, her silhouette barely visible in the dim light. She sat at my bedside, brushing a hand over my forehead, and for a brief moment, her touch felt comforting. Then her fingers brushed over my bandages, tracing them slowly, lingering a little too long. "You're healing so well," she whispered, her voice almost reverent. "It's amazing to watch," she continued, her fingers gliding over my arm, her gaze distant as if she were lost in thought. I don't often get the chance to connect with patients like this. Usually, they're just in and out and I never see them again." I tried to pull my arm back, but she held it firmly, her fingers cold against my skin. "You've been good to me," she continued, her voice softening. "So understanding. You're different." Her words made my stomach twist. I forced a weak smile, unsure of how to respond, but something about her intensity made my skin crawl. She was closer to me than she'd ever been before, her face inches from mine, her eyes dark and unblinking. "Emily, I think I need some rest," I managed to say, hoping she'd take the hint. But she didn't move. She only leaned closer, her expression unreadable. "I know you're tired," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "But don't worry. I'll always be here. I'll make sure nothing separates us." For a moment, I felt frozen under her gaze, a suffocating weight pressing down on me. Then, without another word, she stood up, her movements calm and composed. She smoothed her uniform, casting a final, lingering look before quietly slipping out of the room. As soon as the door clicked shut, I felt a rush of panic that I could no longer ignore. This was no longer about recovery or safety, it was control. Emily's attention, once comforting, had morphed into something darker, something that felt all-consuming and suffocating. The following day, I resolved to take action. As soon as she left, I dug around my bed, searching for anything I could use to communicate with the outside world. My phone had been taken away for safekeeping after the accident, but I'd seen a landline at the nurse's station down the hall. If I could find a way to distract her, I might be able to get out, make a call, and get help. That evening, I pretended to be in pain, groaning and clutching my side until she came rushing in, her face filled with concern. As she busied herself with checking my vitals, I muttered about needing something from the supply closet down the hall. She hesitated, eyeing me suspiciously, but finally relented. The second she was gone, I slipped out of bed, ignoring the searing pain in my side, and hurried to the nurse's station. The landline sat on the desk, so close I could feel the freedom within reach. My hands trembled as I lifted the receiver, pressing it to my ear, only to be met with silence. I tapped the buttons, hoping for a dial tone, but nothing. My heart sank as I realized the phone had been disabled. Footsteps echoed from the hallway, and I barely managed to slip back into my bed before she returned. She walked in, carrying a small pill bottle, her eyes narrowing when she saw me. "Where did you go?" she asked, her tone sharper than before. "I didn't go anywhere," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. She stared at me, her gaze piercing, and for a moment, I thought she'd call me out. But instead, she just smiled. A cold, unsettling smile that made my blood run cold. "I'll let it slide this time," she said, her voice soft but with a chilling edge. "But don't push it." As she left, locking the door behind her, I knew my window of opportunity was closing fast. I lay awake that night, my mind racing, desperate to piece together a plan. Emily's transformation from a caring nurse to something darker had left me on edge, and the walls of my hospital room felt closer than ever. Every sound outside my door, a cart rolling down the hall, faint footsteps, the hum of fluorescent lights, put me on high alert. The following morning, Emily came in, her demeanor as gentle as ever, yet there was a guarded look in her eyes. She moved about the room with a practiced calm, checking my vitals and adjusting the machines, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me more closely than usual. I tried not to react, pretending to be absorbed in a book she'd left on my nightstand, but my heart pounded every time she glanced in my direction. After she left, I began testing small boundaries. I tried the window, hoping for some way to open it, but it was sealed shut and reinforced with thick, durable glass. My room felt more like a prison cell each day, and my desperation to leave grew stronger with each passing hour. Later that evening, just as I was beginning to lose hope, I heard a quiet knock on my door. I froze, unsure of what to expect, when a voice, a soft, unfamiliar one, whispered, Are you all right in there?" I jumped up and moved to the door, pressing my ear against it. "Yes," I whispered back. "Who are you?" There was a brief pause before the voice replied, "My name is Jordan. I'm a volunteer here. I've seen you in here always alone, and..." Something seemed wrong. Relief flooded over me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. "Please, you have to help me," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. I think my nurse, Emily, she's keeping me here." Jordan hesitated, and I could hear him shifting nervously on the other side of the door. "Are you sure?" he asked cautiously. "She seems nice." I clenched my fists, feeling frustration rise. "I'm positive," I whispered. "Please, I just need you to help me get in touch with my family. They've stopped visiting, and I know Emily is behind it." There was another pause, and I heard him sigh. "All right," he finally said. I'll see what I can do, but I'll have to be careful. If they find out I'm talking to you, I could lose my volunteer position." I thanked him, my heart racing with a mixture of hope and fear. If Jordan could get a message out, maybe I'd finally have a chance to escape this twisted arrangement. But I also knew that if Emily suspected anything, her control over me would tighten even more. The next day passed in a haze. Emily's presence seemed more intense than ever, and every time she looked at me, it felt like she was peering into my mind, reading every desperate thought I tried to hide. I kept my head down, acting as compliant as I could, but the tension between us was palpable. I kept thinking about what would happen if she caught on, if she suspected even for a moment that I was plotting something. Finally, during her evening rounds, Emily leaned close, her voice a soft murmur. "You've been so quiet today," she noted, a hint of amusement in her tone. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," I replied, forcing a yawn and sinking deeper into the bed. I could feel her gaze linger on me, her eyes tracing my face as if searching for any sign of resistance. I held my breath, waiting for her to move on, praying she wouldn't notice anything unusual. Then, just as she turned to leave, she paused at the doorway. "By the way," she said, her voice too casual, "we're going to start a new medication for you tomorrow. Just something to help with your anxiety." A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't mentioned anxiety, and the idea of taking anything that would cloud my mind or dull my senses terrified me. But I nodded, forcing a weak smile, and she left, the door locking behind her with a sharp click. That night, I barely slept, dreading the moment she'd come in with a fresh dose of whatever sedative she planned to give me. I needed to escape before that happened, before she robbed me of the small scraps of control I still had left. True to his word, Jordan returned the next day, his voice barely a whisper through the door. "I found a way to get you a phone," he said, "but it'll be risky. I'll have to sneak it in during my shift tonight. Are you ready for this?" I nodded, relief flooding over me. "Yes, just please be careful." He assured me he'd be back, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. But as the hours dragged on, I grew more anxious, fearing that something had gone wrong or that Emily had caught him. Each passing minute felt like an eternity, the walls of the room pressing in on me. Finally, well past midnight, I heard the door click open. Jordan slipped inside, his face pale and tense. He held a small, cheap cell phone in his hand and quickly handed it to me. "I could only keep it on for a few minutes," he whispered. "You'll have to be fast." My hands trembled as I took the phone, dialing my parents' number, praying that they would answer. The phone rang once, twice, and finally, my mother picked up, her voice groggy and confused. "Mom," I whispered, keeping my voice low, "it's me. Please, you have to listen. I'm in the hospital and my nurse, she's keeping me here. I don't know why, but something is wrong. I think I'm in danger." There was a stunned silence on the other end, and then her voice sharpened with urgency. "What? Honey, are you all right? We've been trying to visit, but every time we call, they tell us you're not allowed visitors." "That's Emily," I said, my voice shaking. "She's blocking everyone. Please, get here as soon as you can." Before she could respond, the phone was snatched from my hand. I looked up, my heart sinking as I saw Emily standing there, her face twisted in an expression of fury I'd never seen before. She crushed the phone in her fist, her eyes flashing with a dangerous intensity. "So," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you thought you could escape." I felt my blood run cold as she loomed over me, her expression shifting from fury to something darker, something almost possessive. She turned to Jordan, who stood frozen, fear etched across his face. "Thank you for your assistance, Jordan," she said smoothly. "I'll take it from here." Before I could shout for help, she pressed a syringe into my arm, her expression eerily calm. "This will help you relax," she murmured, her voice soft and soothing. I felt the world grow hazy, my limbs going numb as the sedative took hold. My vision blurred, Emily's face the last thing I saw before everything faded to black. When I woke, I was in a new room, even smaller than before, with no windows and only a single dim light overhead. My limbs felt heavy, and a dull ache pulsed through my body. I tried to sit up, but leather restraints bound my wrists and ankles to the bed. Emily's voice drifted from somewhere nearby, calm and controlled. "I'm sorry it had to come to this," she said, her tone almost gentle. "But I couldn't let you leave. Not after all the progress we've made together." She stepped into view, her face soft and maternal, like a caretaker who was simply doing what was best. "I know you don't understand now," she continued, "but this is for your own good. You need me, and soon, you'll see that I'm the only one who truly cares about you." My stomach churned, panic flooding through me as I realized the extent of her control, the depths of her obsession. Emily had taken every measure to ensure that I was entirely under her care, isolated from the world, with no one to turn to. And as I lay there, trapped in the sterile silence of that room, I began to understand one horrifying truth. I was entirely at her mercy, and she intended to keep me there. The days became a dizzy blur in the dim confines of my new room. My reality narrowed to Emily's constant presence and the numbing effects of whatever sedatives she administered. I lost all sense of time. The concept of morning and night blurred into one long, never-ending moment. Each day, she'd sit beside me, her touch lingering on my arm or my forehead, speaking in soothing tones as if I were a child. "I know this feels harsh," she'd say, her eyes soft with feigned sympathy. "But one day you'll see why I'm doing this. You're not ready to leave. You're safe here, with me." I fought to stay alert, to resist the drugs, but the weight of my confinement bore down on me, wearing away at my strength. Every now and then, a sliver of clarity would cut through the haze, reminding me of my family, my friends, my life outside of these sterile walls. But each time I tried to hold on to those thoughts, Emily was there, her words and actions eroding the fragments of myself I struggled to retain. One night, when the drugs had worn off slightly, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a flicker of defiance deep within me. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't let her trap me forever. I had to fight back. Summoning what little strength I had, I began to strain against the leather restraints, trying to loosen them. Hours passed, my wrists raw and bruised, but eventually, the leather gave way, and one hand slipped free. The adrenaline coursed through me, momentarily banishing the haze. I worked quickly, freeing my other hand and then my ankles. My heart raced as I carefully stood, legs shaky from disuse, and moved to the door. I had no idea if it was locked, but I knew this might be my only chance to escape. I pushed the door gently, feeling a surge of relief when it opened silently. The hallway was dark, the air heavy with the quiet hum of machines. I inched forward, my heart pounding in my chest as I made my way toward the exit sign at the end of the hall. Every step felt like a victory, bringing me closer to freedom. Just as I reached the main hall, a figure appeared at the end of the corridor. My heart dropped. Emily stood there, her face a mask of shock and fury, quickly replaced by an unsettling calm. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked, her voice low and deadly. I froze, terror rooting me to the spot. But then something in me snapped. I couldn't let her win. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted down the hall, ignoring the pain that shot through my legs. I heard her footsteps behind me, closing in quickly, her voice calling out in a chilling tone, "You can't leave. You need me." I reached a stairwell, my hands trembling as I flung the door open and stumbled down the steps. My body screamed in protest, but fear pushed me forward. The cold reality of what awaited me if I stayed fueling my escape. I had to make it out. I had to survive. Bursting out onto a lower floor, I finally saw a security guard patrolling near the exit. I shouted, my voice hoarse and desperate, "Help! Please! She's keeping me here against my will." The guard turned, his expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. He started toward me, but before he could reach us, Emily came around the corner, her face pale with rage. "He's confused," she said smoothly, her voice suddenly gentle and pleading. "He's one of our patients. He just needs to return to his room." But the guard hesitated, glancing between us. I forced myself to stand tall, my voice firm despite the terror that gripped me. "Please listen to me. She's lying. She's keeping me here. I'm not supposed to be here." The guard's eyes narrowed, and he looked at Emily with suspicion. "I think we need to get a doctor involved. This doesn't seem right." Emily's mask slipped, her expression darkening. She took a step toward me, her eyes filled with a manic determination. "He's not well," she insisted, her voice shaking with desperation. "He doesn't know what he's saying." But the guard held up his hand, motioning her to stop. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step back." For a moment, she looked like she might lunge at him, her eyes wild, but she forced a strained smile, stepping back with a forced calm. "Of course," she murmured. "I just care about him. I want what's best." The guard led me to a waiting area, far enough from her that I felt the tight grip of fear slowly begin to loosen. He placed a call, and within minutes, other hospital staff arrived, accompanied by a doctor I hadn't seen before. I explained everything, my words spilling out in a frantic, breathless rush. They listened, exchanging glances, and after I was done, they assured me they'd handle it. It felt like hours passed as I waited, my pulse gradually calming. Eventually, they returned, telling me that Emily was being questioned and that I'd be released to my family immediately. As I was escorted out of the hospital, the reality of what had happened hit me fully. Emily's control, her manipulation, her twisted obsession. She had almost succeeded in trapping me in a nightmare I might never have escaped. I fought the urge to look back as I stepped outside, the cool night air filling my lungs like the taste of freedom. My family was waiting, their faces filled with relief and worry, their hugs grounding me back in the world I'd feared I'd lost forever. They led me to the car, their voices gentle, reassuring, as they promised to support me through the recovery, both physical and emotional, that lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, the hospital launched an investigation. I learned that Emily had a history of obsessively attaching herself to patients, though none of her previous actions had ever gone as far as they had with me. She was quietly dismissed, her license revoked, but I knew she was out there, somewhere, still convinced she'd been doing the right thing. As I slowly resumed my life, I couldn't escape the lingering sense of her presence, the shadow she'd left on my thoughts. Every creak of the floor, every flickering light, Every quiet footstep at night reminded me of the prison she'd built around me. And though I was free, a part of me would always be haunted by her whisper, echoing in the back of my mind. You need me, because for those endless days, in that isolated room, she'd made me believe it.